Black maid spotted wearing diamond ring. Millionaire wife yells, then sees the engraving. The Danbury estate sat high above the cliffs of Willow Ridge, its massive glass panels gleaming like polished mirrors in the morning sun, framed by white columns and a winding stone driveway long enough to forget where it began. Every corner of the mansion seemed designed not just for function, but for admiration. The chandeliers, hand-cut from imported crystal. The grand piano that no one played. The Italian marble floors so glossy they reflected your own hesitation as you walked across them. But behind all that opulence, beneath the silence of money, there was always movement. The quiet choreography of housekeepers, chefs, gardeners, and drivers who made the fantasy look effortless. Among them was Ruth Ellison, a black woman in her late 40s, graceful in motion and calm in voice, with eyes that had seen more than they ever said. She wore her uniform neatly, her hair always tied back in a low twist, and her presence so measured that sometimes guests forgot she was in the room at all. That was exactly how she preferred it. Until the ring. It happened on a Friday morning. The sun had just begun to filter through the wide windows of the breakfast room, gilding the edge of the white china teacups. Claire Danbury, the millionaire matriarch of the house, sat at the end of the long table, sipping green tea with her habitual rigid posture, flipping through a slim travel magazine with an eye for French villas. Ruth moved efficiently between the cabinets and the counter, preparing fresh fruit and setting the table with a precision that came from decades of domestic service. She wore no makeup, no perfume, nothing to distract from the image of discretion she had cultivated so well. But this morning, something different caught Claire's eye. As Ruth reached across the table to refill the porcelain bowl with blueberries, a glint of light sparkled from her left hand. Claire's head snapped up. "Wait," she said, sharp but puzzled. "Ruth, is that a ring?" Ruth froze momentarily, then glanced down instinctively. She had forgotten to take it off, the simple habit broken, just for once. Claire's eyes narrowed. "That's not a wedding band. That's a diamond." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Even the family dog, curled on the settee, raised its head. Ruth's voice was steady, her hands still moving. "Yes, ma'am." Claire rose from her chair, walked around the table, and stopped just short of Ruth, her blue eyes fixed on the woman's hand. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice dipping into disbelief, tinged with something sharper. "It was a gift," Ruth replied. Claire blinked. "A gift? From who?" There was no sarcasm in Ruth's voice, no edge, just truth. "From someone who cared about me." Claire laughed once, that high, disbelieving sound people make when they assume the world is out of tune. "Do you know what kind of diamond that is?" "No, ma'am." "That's a 2.5-carat princess cut," Claire said, folding her arms. With clarity. "That's not costume jewelry. That's not something people like you wear just because someone cares." Ruth's lips pressed together. Claire stepped closer. "I mean, no offense, but let's be honest. You clean houses for a living. You fold towels. You scrape my son's dried oatmeal off his plate. So please don't insult my intelligence. Whose ring is that really?" There was a moment of silence that felt like it might split the marble tiles. Ruth didn't flinch. "It's mine. I don't steal Mrs. Danbury." Claire tilted her head, studied her. "Then explain it. Who gave it to you?" Ruth's gaze met hers, firm but not confrontational. "It belonged to someone I loved. He passed away 3 years ago." Claire opened her mouth, closed it, then took a step back as if she just noticed the air had changed. She glanced again at the ring, not just at the stone, but now at the band itself, tilting her head, squinting slightly. And there it was, an engraving, so faint it was almost invisible in the daylight, but unmistakable up close. Yours always, T.J. Claire staggered back half a step. The room was suddenly colder. She knew those initials. T.J. Her voice cracked. Ruth said nothing. Claire backed toward the table, her hand trembling slightly now. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. And in a way she had. You mean, Thomas? She whispered. My Thomas. The silence between them grew heavy. Ruth finally looked up, and though her voice was quiet, there was a force in it that pulled the room taut. I never wanted you to know like this, she said. But yes, Thomas gave it to me. Claire looked like her legs might give out. Why? She asked, almost a plea now. Why you? Ruth exhaled slowly, as if pulling a memory from the depths of her ribcage. Because he loved me, she said. And not just in passing. Not as a mistake. He loved me for who I was, even when he wasn't brave enough to say it out loud. Claire's hands gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white. That's not possible, she said. He was married to me. Ruth didn't blink. Yes, ma'am. He was. Then softer. But that doesn't mean he wasn't also mine. The air was brittle. Claire looked at her as if trying to wake up from a dream, her breathing shallow, chest rising and falling like the tide in a storm. You were just the maid, she whispered. Ruth nodded. And he saw me anyway. For the first time in over a decade, Claire Danbury didn't know what to do. She stood frozen in the middle of the sun-drenched breakfast room, her tea forgotten and her eyes still fixed on the woman who had, until now, been invisible to her. A woman who had laid out her linens, fluffed her pillows, folded her silks, and who now stood there wearing a diamond that once graced the finger of the man they had both called mine. The weight of that engraving, yours always, T.J., echoed in her mind like a bell tolling at a funeral she didn't know had happened. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Ruth, on the other hand, was calm. Not triumphant, not smug, just calm. As if she had been carrying this moment for years, tucked into the folds of her uniform, waiting for the world to finally catch up to the truth she already knew. Claire finally turned, stumbling toward the doorway, her hand still gripping the chair as though she needed it to stay upright. She paused just long enough to throw a single shaky command over her shoulder. Don't go anywhere. Ruth remained where she stood, spine straight, eyes steady. I wasn't planning to. Claire walked fast, too fast. Up the sweeping staircase, past the tall oil paintings she never noticed anymore, past the antique mirror imported from Florence, and into the master bedroom where her late husband's belongings still lingered in quiet corners. She flung open the closet, dropping to her knees beside an old wooden chest she hadn't touched in years. Inside were the pieces of a life she once believed belonged to her alone. Cufflinks, letters, birthday cards with their edges softened by time, and at the very bottom, Thomas's journal. It had been locked for years out of respect or maybe denial, but the key had always been taped behind the top drawer of his nightstand. Her fingers trembled as she opened the book, flipping past entries about board meetings, vacations, arguments, and finally, dates that coincided with a time when he was distant, detached, always working late. One name appeared again and again. R.P. Claire's mouth went dry. She flipped further. She listens when I speak. Not just hears, listens. Ruth sees through the silence. Through me. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd met her first. I gave her the ring today, not because I expect her to wear it, just so she knows someone truly saw her worth. Claire's vision blurred. She closed the journal softly, holding it against her chest like a wound she didn't want to bleed from. It wasn't an affair in the traditional sense. No hotel keys or lipstick stains, but it was something deeper, something more dangerous. It was love. And worse, it was love he had never shared with her. Downstairs, Ruth waited. She had returned to the dishes, quietly rinsing the fruit bowl she'd abandoned, her face composed but not blank. Inside, her heart pounded like a metronome gone rogue. Steady, insistent, and out of time. She had never wanted this moment, never wished it. She had planned to take the secret to her grave, letting Thomas's love remain something sacred and silent. But the ring had slipped her memory that morning, the way trauma sometimes does. She hadn't worn it in weeks, had no intention of doing so today. But her fingers had found it in the drawer beside her bed while she tied her shoes, and for some reason she had slid it on. Maybe it was longing, maybe it was a mistake, or maybe it was fate finally clearing its throat. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway now, her posture different. Not defensive, not furious, but lost. "I read his journal," Claire said softly. Ruth didn't speak. "I never knew. He never even hinted." Ruth turned the faucet off and dried her hands, slowly. "Because he couldn't," she said gently. "You were his life, his legacy, his family. I was just a truth he couldn't say out loud." Claire walked forward, placing the worn leather journal on the counter. "I hated you for a moment this morning," she admitted. "I looked at you and saw betrayal." "And now?" Ruth asked. Claire's eyes filled, but she didn't blink. "Now I see what I wasn't willing to see before, that he was a man divided. And maybe I wasn't the only one he loved. But I was the only one the world allowed him to love in public." There it was, the real hurt, not just in the revelation, but in the reminder of how power, race, and respectability danced around the edges of love like a cruel masquerade. Ruth's voice lowered. "He didn't do it to hurt you." Claire nodded. "I know." Silence fell again, heavy, but this time not violent. Claire reached out, slowly, and turned Ruth's hand so the ring was visible again. She looked at it a long time, then whispered, "He never bought me one like this." Ruth didn't respond. What could she say? But Claire, to her own surprise, gave a small, wry smile. "That's not a complaint," she added. "Just a fact." She let Ruth's hand go. "Do the others know?" Claire asked. "The staff? My children?" "No," Ruth said. "And they won't." Claire nodded slowly. "Then, do you still love him?" Ruth's eyes shimmered. "Every day." Claire took a deep breath. "Well then," she said softly, "you better keep wearing that ring." And with that, she turned and walked away. Not broken, not angry, just changed. As Ruth stood alone in the kitchen, the sunlight returned, and the ring on her finger caught it again. But this time, no one looked away. It didn't take long for the house to start whispering. The Danbury estate had always been a place where secrets moved beneath the surface like water beneath ice. Unseen but always present. And now, after the ring, after that morning's confrontation in the breakfast room, the silence seemed to shift in color. It wasn't just routine anymore. It was alert, watchful. The other staff didn't ask Ruth directly. Not at first. But she could feel their questions hovering behind polite glances and half-finished sentences. There were pauses where there hadn't been before. There were sidelong looks that lingered just long enough to say, "We saw it too." It was Isla, the youngest of the maids, barely 22, fresh from trade school, all nerves and kindness, who finally asked. They were in the laundry room folding linens when she glanced over and whispered, "Miss Ruth, was that really a diamond?" Ruth didn't stop folding. She ran her hand along the edge of the duvet cover, then said without looking up, "Yes, it is." Isla's eyes widened. "It's beautiful. Thank you. Did someone give it to you?" Ruth paused for a moment, then nodded. "A long time ago." Isla hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "I don't mean to be disrespectful, ma'am, but, Mrs. Danbury looked real upset. Did something happen?" There it was, the question everyone wanted to ask, wrapped in polite words. Ruth turned to her, her voice calm. "Something did happen, but not today." Isla nodded slowly, her fingers nervously creasing a towel. "Okay, I like you. Everyone here does. And I don't want anyone treating you different just 'cause." Ruth smiled then, soft and full. "Thank you, Isla. But I've been treated different my whole life. It's not new, and it won't change who I am." Isla returned the smile, but Ruth could still feel the worry in her. And she wasn't wrong to worry. That afternoon, Claire's daughter, Lillian, returned from college for a surprise visit. She was 21, sharp-tongued and opinionated, with her father's fire in her eyes. Her sudden appearance wasn't suspicious on its own. She often came home unannounced, especially when she needed something, but the timing, so close after the morning's revelation, made Ruth's chest tighten. Lillian hugged her mother briefly in the marble foyer, her oversized tote bag slung over one shoulder, and barely glanced at Ruth, who stood nearby, waiting to take her coat. Then she paused. Her gaze dropped to Ruth's hand, and her brow lifted. "New ring?" she asked. Ruth didn't reply. Claire stepped in quickly, her tone just a shade too casual. "It's a keepsake. Family." Lillian's eyes flicked between them. "Looks expensive." Claire smiled thinly. "Some things are worth more because of what they represent, not their price tag." Ruth said nothing. She had learned long ago that the most powerful thing in some moments was restraint. Later that evening, Ruth was setting out the tea service in the living room when she overheard Lillian pressing her mother for answers. "You're not seriously telling me that she's wearing Dad's ring?" Lillian said in a half-whisper. "She's wearing a ring," Claire replied. "With his initials engraved in it?" "Lillian." "No, Mom. That's weird. That's not normal. That's not even—" She lowered her voice further. "Appropriate. She cleaned for him. She wasn't his—" "She wasn't." Claire's voice cut in low and sharp. "Stop." There was a silence. "You don't know what you're talking about," Claire continued. "And neither did I. Not until this morning." "What do you mean?" "I mean, your father had more than one truth in his life, and I've decided not to bury it just because it makes us uncomfortable." Lillian scoffed. "You sound like you're defending her." "I'm defending the truth," Claire said. "Something your father spent his entire life hiding." There was another pause. Then, quietly, "Does this mean she gets to stay?" Claire let out a slow breath. "She stays if she wants to." From the hallway, Ruth backed away, careful not to let the tea tray rattle. Her hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. Because for all of Claire's calm, Ruth knew how quickly a house could turn. And Lillian, for all her modern ideals and university debates, was her father's daughter. And Thomas had been a man who lived behind masks. That night, Ruth sat alone in her modest apartment above the garage, the ring placed gently on the table in front of her. She turned it over slowly in her fingers, staring at the engraving. "Yours always, T.J." What had been private now felt exposed. What had been sacred now hung in the air like open secret. She remembered the day he gave it to her, not with fanfare, not on bended knee, but in the quiet stillness of a Sunday afternoon when everyone was out and the house had felt like theirs alone. He had slipped it onto her hand without words, just a sigh, a hand to her cheek, and eyes that said more than he ever dared. And she had worn it for him, quietly, alone, until now. Now it was not just memory. It was history, and scandal, and rumor. She tucked it back into its velvet pouch, placed it in her nightstand, and sat on the edge of her bed. The phone rang. It was Miles Danbury, Claire's son. She stared at the name, unsure, then answered. "Miss Ruth." "Yes." "I hope this isn't inappropriate," he said quickly. "But can I talk to you sometime tomorrow? Just us." "About what?" "I found something," he said, "in my dad's study. I think you should see it." Her breath caught. "What did you find, Miles?" "I'm not sure yet," he said, "but I think it's about you." The next morning was gray. A thin mist curled around the windows of the Danbury estate like breath against cold glass, softening the edges of the world outside and casting a kind of hush over the house, as if it, too, was waiting to learn what had been hidden for so long. Ruth moved quietly through the kitchen, setting down mugs, slicing fruit, but her hands weren't entirely present. They moved by memory. Her mind, however, was in the past, and in the study where Miles Danbury had asked to meet her. By noon, the house was mostly empty. Claire had taken Lillian to an art gallery downtown, and the rest of the staff were deep in their usual routines. Ruth walked slowly down the west corridor, her feet pressing into the old carpet, her chest tight with a tension she hadn't let herself feel in years. The door to the study was ajar. Inside, Miles stood behind his father's desk, tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, wearing a navy button-up and an expression somewhere between uncertainty and revelation. "Miss Ruth," he said, stepping back. "Thanks for coming." She nodded once, stepping inside. "You said you found something." Miles gestured to a pile of papers on the desk. Envelopes, a leather folder, and a small safe that sat open beside them. "I wasn't looking for anything. I was just cleaning out some of Dad's old things. But this stuff, I don't know. It didn't make sense. Not at first." He picked up the leather folder and handed it to her. Ruth opened it slowly. Inside were bank records, statements going back over 10 years. But not from any account she recognized. This one had been opened discreetly with a trustee name she didn't know, but the deposits were unmistakable. Regular, significant, a separate account. Hidden. Miles watched her read, then said quietly, "That account was set up for you." Ruth's eyes lifted. "What?" "My father used a lawyer downtown, someone completely unaffiliated with the family's regular firm. He had it drawn up years ago. I only found it because the safe key was taped under one of the desk drawers. He's been sending money, large amounts, quietly, consistently." Ruth shook her head, stunned. "I never saw a cent of this." "He wasn't sending it directly to you," Miles explained. "It was all in a holding fund tied to a trust, and I think he planned to give it to you after he passed." "Why?" Miles hesitated, then handed her something else. A letter, unsealed, handwritten. "Ruth, if you're reading this, then I never found the courage to say what I should have said face to face. That's been the story of us, hasn't it? So many silences where there should have been words. I loved you. I loved you more than I ever understood how to express. I didn't know how to make it right without breaking everything around me. My marriage, my family, my image. But I want you to have this. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's something. Yours always, T.J. Ruth read it slowly, her lips pressing into a thin line as she swallowed emotion like stones in her throat. I never wanted money, she whispered. I believe you, Miles said, but he clearly wanted you to have it, to be seen, to be taken care of. She looked at the envelope again, then at the man across from her former employer's son. You knew your father better than most, she said. Does this surprise you? Miles gave a slow, exhausted smile. Honestly? No, not really. He was a complex man. I always suspected he carried regrets. I just never thought they had a name. Silence lingered, but not unkindly. Then he asked, "What do you want to do with it?" Ruth held the folder a little tighter. I don't know, she said. I'll need time to think. Miles nodded, then hesitated, voice dropping. There's one more thing. He turned and opened a small drawer in the desk, pulling out a photograph. It was black and white, old, folded at the edges. Ruth took it slowly, and her hand began to shake the moment she saw it. It was her, much younger, maybe 25, sitting on a bench in the estate's rose garden. And beside her, Thomas, smiling, casual, holding her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. You kept this? She asked. Miles shook his head. I've never seen it before. It was tucked inside an envelope labeled, to be opened after my death. Ruth looked down at the image, the past rising like warm breath through winter frost. In that photo, they weren't maid and master. They were just two people, laughing, alive. That evening, Ruth stood once again in the kitchen, hands trembling as she dried the same plate 3 times over. The entire staff had grown silent around her. Not cold, not rude, just reverent. Something had changed. And then Claire returned. She walked into the kitchen, placed her purse on the counter, and looked at Ruth with unreadable eyes. My son told me, she said. Ruth turned. He showed me the account, the letter, the photo. Claire exhaled. Part of me wants to hate him, she said. For all the years he kept this from me. For all the nights I wondered where his heart really was. But the truth is, I think I always knew. Ruth waited. I can't change the past, Claire said quietly, but I can choose how I carry it forward. She reached into her handbag and pulled out something small, a velvet box. I bought this 2 years ago, Claire said, after he died. I thought I would wear it myself one day. A new beginning, something symbolic. She opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold chain. On it, a small charm, a rose, engraved with the initials T, J, in the petals. I think he meant for you to have this, she said. Ruth blinked, then slowly reached out and accepted the gift. For a moment, neither woman spoke. But something passed between them, not friendship, not quite forgiveness, but understanding. And in a house built on performance and presentation, it was more than either had expected. I don't know what happens next, Claire said softly. Ruth nodded. Neither do I. But maybe, Claire added, we stop pretending none of it mattered. And in the distance, a clock struck 7, marking the end of a chapter neither of them had meant to write, but both of them had lived. It began, as things so often do, with a photo. Miles had meant well. He'd posted the image late one evening, that old black and white picture of his father and Ruth, seated in the garden, holding hands as if the world hadn't already decided their places. The caption was simple, "There's always more to the story." He hadn't expected it to go viral. But within hours, the image had been shared thousands of times, first on niche forums, then by activists, then by journalists who recognized the Danbury name, the estate, the late Thomas Danbury himself. The internet, hungry as ever for both scandal and truth, tore the lid off a story that had never been public. A story that, for decades, had been private, quiet, hidden by class, race, and reputation. Now it was everywhere. Headlines splashed across gossip blogs and business journals alike. Billionaire's secret love revealed. Who was Ruth Ellison? The maid and the millionaire. Family secrets emerge. Hidden affair or untold love story? Claire's phone rang nonstop for 3 days. Donors to the family foundation wanted answers. Journalists camped outside the estate gates. And Ruth didn't leave her quarters for almost a week. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't afraid. But she was tired. She had lived that love once, in full, in silence, in sacrifice. She had buried it with dignity, and now it had been exhumed by strangers eager for spectacle. One morning, she stood by the window in her modest suite above the garage, watching the fog curl around the hedges, when a knock came. Claire. She entered without preamble, looking composed but weary, a woman who had spent years holding up a name, only to find the world preferred the cracks. "They want me to give a statement," Claire said. "The board, the donors, the press, everyone." Ruth remained quiet. "They want me to say it was nothing, that it was all a misunderstanding." Claire looked Ruth in the eye. "But I'm not going to lie." Ruth studied her carefully. "You don't owe me anything." Claire gave a tired smile. "That's not true. I owe you truth. And maybe an apology I can never put into the right words." There was a pause. "I'm planning a press conference," Claire said. "I'll tell them he loved you, that you were part of his life, that you mattered." "And your children?" Ruth asked gently. "Lillian's furious," Claire admitted. "Miles is calm, but shaken. But they'll adapt. They'll learn." "And you?" Claire looked out the window. "I spent 25 years loving a man who gave pieces of himself away in secret. That hurts, but it doesn't erase the love I had, or the love he had for you. I can hold both truths." She turned back to Ruth, stepping forward slowly. "There's one more thing," she said, opening her bag. She pulled out a printed envelope and held it out. Ruth took it carefully. Inside was a notarized letter, legal, official. Claire continued. "The board agreed. The foundation Thomas built will now be co-chaired in his honor, and they want to offer you the second chair." Ruth's mouth parted slightly. "What? You know how this place works. You've watched from the shadows long enough, and you've given more to this family, to this home, than half the people paid to sit at those tables." Ruth blinked, speechless. Claire smiled. "I can't change what should have been, but I can try to build something better." For the first time in a long time, Ruth felt something stir beneath her ribs. Not grief, not guilt, but possibility. She looked down at the envelope again, then at the woman who had once called her just the maid. "No," Ruth said softly. "I was never just that." "No," Claire echoed. "You never were." 2 weeks later, Ruth stood at a podium in front of a packed ballroom. The same ballroom where, for years, she had polished glasses and refilled champagne. Now, her voice carried across the marble floors and chandeliers. She wore the ring, and around her neck, the delicate rose charm Claire had once claimed for herself. "I never asked for this spotlight," Ruth began. "I was content to be invisible because I believed that's how things had to be. But Thomas Danbury saw something different. Not just in me, but in what love can look like when it's free of shame." Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. "In this house, I scrubbed floors while wearing a ring no one saw. Now I stand here, and I ask you not to see me as a scandal, but as a truth long ignored." Applause rose. It was soft at first, then strong. In the front row, Claire clapped. In the seat beside her, Miles wiped his eye, and somewhere far beyond the marble and velvet of the ballroom, a man's memory rested a little easier.